The sun was starting to set over the city of Chicago, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The streets were alive with the sounds of people rushing home after a long day. Cars honked impatiently as they waited at red lights, and the smell of hot dogs from street vendors filled the air. Among the crowd walked Jason Carter, a man who stood out even in such a busy place. He wore an expensive suit that fit perfectly, polished leather shoes, and carried himself with confidence. But despite his outward appearance, there was a heaviness in his step that no one could see. Jason had spent most of his life building his empire. From humble beginnings, he had clawed his way to the top, making millions through hard work and ruthless decisions. People admired him, or feared him, but no one really knew him. Not anymore. These days, Jason kept mostly to himself, too consumed by his problems to care about anything else. And right now his biggest problem wasn't money or business. It was his mother, Linda. Linda Carter was the only person who had ever truly loved Jason without expecting anything in return. She had raised him alone after his father left when he was just a child. Even when times were tough, she always made sure he had food on the table and clothes on his back. Her kindness and strength had shaped him into the man he was today. But now, she lay in a hospital bed, her body ravaged by an illness that doctors couldn't cure. No matter how much money Jason threw at the problem, it didn't change the fact that time was running out. As Jason turned onto Michigan Avenue, he tried to push thoughts of his mother out of his mind. Thinking about her only made him feel helpless, and Jason hated feeling helpless. He quickened his pace, eager to get back to his penthouse apartment where he could be alone with his thoughts. But fate had other plans. Just as he passed by a narrow alleyway between two tall buildings, a small voice called out to him. At first, Jason thought he imagined it. The noise of the city drowned out most sounds anyway. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. "Sir, wait." Jason stopped walking and turned around reluctantly. The voice belonged to a boy standing near the mouth of the alley. He looked no older than 12, maybe 13. His clothes were dirty and torn, and his face was smudged with dirt. His dark hair stuck out in messy clumps, and his sneakers were worn down to almost nothing. Yet, despite his ragged appearance, there was something unusual about him. His piercing blue eyes seemed far too wise for someone so young. They locked onto Jason's gaze with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "What do you want?" Jason asked sharply, his tone betraying his irritation. He didn't have time for distractions, especially not from some kid living on the streets. The boy took a hesitant step forward, clutching something tightly in his hand. "I can heal your mother," he said softly, his voice steady, despite the weight of his words. For a moment, Jason stared at him in disbelief. Had he heard that right? Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, a scam designed to prey on desperate people like him? Anger flared inside him, but before he could say anything, the boy continued. "My name is Ethan," he said simply, as if introducing himself was the most natural thing in the world. "And I'm telling the truth." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. How did this boy know about his mother? Sure, Linda's condition wasn't exactly a secret. Her story had been covered in local news articles when Jason donated large sums of money to hospitals. But still, it was unsettling. The way Ethan spoke, with such calm certainty, sent a shiver through Jason that he couldn't explain. "Who are you?" Jason demanded, taking a step closer. Up close, he could see that Ethan's hands were trembling slightly, though his face remained composed. Whatever bravado the boy had mustered seemed fragile, like it might crack at any moment. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held out his clenched fist. Slowly, he opened it to reveal a small glass vial resting in his palm. Inside the vial was a shimmering liquid that caught the fading sunlight, glowing faintly as if alive. Jason frowned, unsure what to make of it. "This will save her," Ethan said quietly. "But you have to trust me." Trust. That word hit Jason like a punch to the gut. Trust was something he didn't give easily, not since he learned the hard way that people would betray you the moment it benefited them. Trust was dangerous, vulnerable, weak. And yet, here he was, standing in front of a scruffy kid who claimed to have the power to heal his dying mother. "You expect me to believe this?" Jason snapped, his voice rising. "Do you think I'm stupid? What is this, some kind of trick?" Ethan shook his head slowly, his expression unchanging. "It's not a trick," he said. "Your mother doesn't have much time left. If you don't act soon, it'll be too late." The words struck a nerve. Jason clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. Who was this boy to lecture him about his mother? Didn't he know how much Jason had already done for her? How many sleepless nights he'd spent researching treatments, consulting specialists, and praying for a miracle? "I've done everything I can," Jason shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the alley. Passers-by glanced curiously in their direction, but neither Jason nor Ethan paid them any attention. "Don't stand there acting like you know what I've been through." To his surprise, Ethan didn't flinch. He met Jason's glare with unwavering calmness. "I know you're scared," he said gently, "but fear won't help her. Only action will." Jason opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, someone had spoken directly to the fear gnawing at his insides. Fear of losing his mother, fear of failing her, fear of being alone. And somehow, Ethan saw it all. Against his better judgment, Jason reached out and took the vial from Ethan's hand. It was surprisingly warm to the touch, and the glowing liquid inside seemed to pulse faintly, as if responding to his presence. He stared at it for a long moment, torn between skepticism and hope. Before he could ask any more questions, Ethan stepped back into the shadows of the alley. "Use it wisely," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then just like that, he disappeared, leaving Jason standing alone with the strange vial in his hand. For several minutes, Jason stood frozen, staring at the spot where Ethan had been. His mind raced with doubts and possibilities. Could this really work? Was it worth the risk? Or was he just grasping at straws because he didn't know what else to do? Finally, with a deep breath, Jason slipped the vial into his pocket and headed toward the hospital. Whether it was hope or desperation driving him, he didn't know. All he knew was that he had to try. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake as he walked into the hospital. The vial felt heavy in his pocket, its warmth seeping through the fabric and reminding him of Ethan's words. Use it wisely. What did that even mean? How could a homeless boy possibly have something so powerful? Every logical part of Jason's brain screamed at him to stop, to turn around and go home. But his heart, his stubborn, desperate heart, wouldn't let him. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt endless. Jason leaned against the wall, staring at the numbers above the door as they lit up one by one. His mind raced with questions. Was this some kind of poison? Could it harm his mother instead of helping her? Or worse, what if it did nothing at all? He had spent so much time searching for solutions, exhausting every resource at his disposal, only to come up empty-handed. Now here he was, pinning his last shred of hope on a stranger's promise. When the elevator doors finally opened, Jason stepped out into the quiet hallway. The smell of antiseptic hit him immediately, sharp and clinical. Nurses moved silently, between rooms, their soft-soled shoes barely making a sound on the tiled floor. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped steadily, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Linda's room was near the end of the corridor. As Jason approached, he hesitated outside the door, steeling himself for what he might find inside. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped in. The sight of his mother lying in the hospital bed made his chest tighten. She looked so small, so frail, almost like a shadow of the strong woman she used to be. Her once vibrant brown hair was streaked with gray now, spread thinly across the pillow. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and endless pain. Machines surrounded her, their screens displaying lines and numbers that meant little to Jason, but everything to the doctors who monitored them. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, gripping the vial tightly in his hand. For a moment, he just watched her breathe. Each shallow inhale and exhale a reminder of how close he was to losing her. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. Crying wouldn't help her now. "Mom," he whispered, reaching out to take her hand. It was cold, almost lifeless, but he held on to it anyway. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to try something different." Jason glanced around the room to make sure no one was watching. The nurse had checked in earlier but hadn't returned since. Satisfied that they were alone, he carefully unscrewed the cap of the vial. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, catching the dim light from the bedside lamp. It looked harmless enough, but Jason couldn't shake the nagging doubt in the back of his mind. "What am I doing?" he muttered under his breath. This wasn't like him. He prided himself on being rational, calculated, always thinking 10 steps ahead. But right now, logic had abandoned him. All he had left was faith, or maybe desperation, in the words of a boy he barely knew. With trembling hands, Jason poured the glowing liquid into Linda's IV line. The moment it touched the tube, the liquid seemed to come alive, swirling and pulsing as if it had a will of its own. Jason froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Had he just made a terrible mistake? For several minutes, nothing happened. The machines continued their steady beeping, and Linda remained still, her breathing unchanged. Jason slumped back in his chair, guilt washing over him. Maybe Ethan had been lying after all. Maybe this was all just some cruel joke. But then something extraordinary began to unfold. Linda's eyelids fluttered. At first, Jason thought it was just a reflex, but then her eyes opened fully. They were cloudy at first, unfocused, but slowly they cleared, locking onto Jason's face. "Jason?" she croaked, her voice weak but unmistakably hers. Jason's breath caught in his throat. "Mom? Can you hear me?" She nodded faintly, her lips curling into a tiny smile. Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," Jason said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You've been sick, but—" He trailed off, unsure how to explain what had just happened. Instead, he reached out and hugged her gently, careful not to disturb the IV line. Tears streamed down his face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of relief. Over the next hour, Linda's condition improved rapidly. Her color returned, her breathing became stronger, and the machines monitoring her vitals started showing dramatic improvements. By the time the nurse came in to check on her, Linda was sitting up in bed, chatting softly with Jason as if nothing had ever been wrong. "Duck-dio," nurse gasped when she saw the readings on the monitors. "This is incredible," she said, flipping through Linda's chart. "Her numbers are normal, completely normal. I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Jason. He wanted to tell someone, to explain that his mother had been healed by a mysterious vial given to him by a homeless boy, but he couldn't. Who would believe him? More importantly, what would happen if people found out about Ethan? Would they hunt him down? Experiment on him? Jason didn't want to risk it. Instead, he stayed silent, keeping the truth locked away in his heart. That night, as Linda drifted off to sleep, Jason left the hospital and headed back to the alley where he had met Ethan. He needed answers. He needed to know who, or what, the boy really was. The streets were quieter now, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. Jason's footsteps echoed against the pavement as he approached the narrow alleyway. To his surprise, Ethan was still there, sitting cross-legged on a cardboard box. His head was tilted back, gazing up at the stars as if lost in thought. "You came back," Ethan said without looking at Jason. His voice was calm, almost amused. "How did you do it?" Jason demanded, his tone sharp with urgency. "What was in that vial?" Ethan finally turned to face him, his piercing blue eyes meeting Jason's. "It's not important what it was," he said. "What matters is why you used it." "I used it because my mother was dying," Jason snapped. "Because I didn't know what else to do." Ethan nodded slowly, as if expecting this response. "And now she's better," he said, But that's not the end of the story, Jason. You've been given a gift, a chance to understand things most people never will. Are you ready for that? Jason frowned, confusion clouding his mind. What are you talking about? What kind of gift? Ethan stood up, brushing dirt off his tattered jeans. Come with me, he said simply, turning toward the shadows at the far end of the alley. If you want answers, follow me. For a moment, Jason hesitated. This whole situation felt surreal, like something out of a dream or a nightmare. But curiosity got the better of him. Against his better judgment, he followed Ethan deeper into the darkness, unsure of what awaited him but certain of one thing. His life would never be the same again. Jason followed Ethan deeper into the alley, his heart pounding in his chest. The farther they went, the darker it became, until the only light came from the faint glow of distant street lamps filtering through the narrow space between buildings. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and shifting as if alive. Jason's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but something stronger, a mix of curiosity and desperation, kept him moving forward. Finally, they reached the dead end of the alley. It was just a brick wall, covered in faded graffiti and littered with trash. Jason frowned, looking around in confusion. "This is it?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "You brought me here for this?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the wall, raising one hand as if reaching for something invisible. To Jason's astonishment, the air in front of them began to shimmer like heat waves rising off asphalt on a summer day. Then, without warning, a glowing portal appeared, hovering silently in midair. Its surface rippled and swirled, emitting soft hues of blue and silver that illuminated the entire alley. "What is that?" Jason stammered, taking an involuntary step backward. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Portals weren't real. They belonged in science fiction movies or fantasy novels, not in the middle of a dirty Chicago alley. "It's called the Nexus," Ethan said calmly, turning to face Jason. His piercing blue eyes reflected the strange light, making him look even more otherworldly than before. "It's a gateway to infinite possibilities." "Infinite possibilities?" Jason repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "What does that even mean?" Ethan smiled faintly, as if amused by Jason's skepticism. "It means exactly what it sounds like. Through the Nexus, you can access knowledge, power, and experiences beyond anything you've ever imagined. But it's not just a gift. It's also a test." "A test?" Jason echoed, feeling more confused than ever. "A test for what?" "For humanity," Ethan replied simply. "Not everyone who finds the Nexus is worthy of using it. Some people seek power for selfish reasons. Others lack the wisdom to handle it responsibly. Only those who prove themselves capable are allowed to pass through." Jason stared at the portal, his thoughts racing. On one hand, this whole situation felt insane, like some elaborate prank or hallucination. But on the other hand, he couldn't deny what he had witnessed earlier. The vial had saved his mother's life, defying every law of science and medicine. If Ethan could do that, then maybe the Nexus was real too. "And you think I'm worthy?" Jason asked skeptically, crossing his arms over his chest. "Why me? I'm just a guy who wanted to save his mom." "You're more than that," Ethan said, his tone serious now. "When I gave you the vial, you had a choice. You could have dismissed me as a crazy kid or thrown the vial away. But you chose to trust me, even though it went against everything you believed in. That act of faith proved that deep down, you care about others more than yourself." Jason opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Was Ethan right? Hadn't he spent most of his life focused on success and wealth, often at the expense of relationships and compassion? Yet when it mattered most, he had put aside his doubts and acted out of love for his mother. Maybe that did make him different. "So what happens if I go through?" Jason asked finally, his gaze fixed on the glowing portal. "That depends on you," Ethan said. "The Nexus will show you countless paths, the choices you've made, the ones you could have made, and the ones still ahead of you. It will teach you how to use its power wisely. But be warned, once you step through, there's no turning back. Your old life will change forever." Jason hesitated, torn between fear and excitement. Part of him wanted to walk away, to return to the safety of his penthouse and pretend none of this had happened. But another part, the part that had seen his mother miraculously healed, knew he couldn't ignore this opportunity. If the Nexus could give him the tools to help others, to make a real difference in the world, how could he refuse? Okay, Jason said finally, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. I'll do it. Ethan nodded approvingly, stepping aside to let Jason approach the portal. As he drew closer, the swirling colors seemed to shift and dance, almost inviting him in. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead, and stepped through. The sensation was indescribable. For a moment, Jason felt as though he were falling, weightless and disoriented. Colors and shapes blurred together, forming patterns that defied logic. Sounds washed over him, whispers, laughter, cries, all overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Jason found himself standing in a vast, open space filled with floating images. Each one was like a window, showing glimpses of different versions of himself. In one, he was a struggling artist painting murals on city walls. In another, he was a teacher, inspiring students with stories of hope and resilience. There were darker visions, too. A ruthless CEO exploiting workers, a lonely man drowning his sorrows in alcohol, a criminal running from the law. Every possible path of his life unfolded before him, reflecting the choices he had made, or could have made. This is incredible, Jason murmured, awestruck. He reached out tentatively toward one of the images and it expanded, pulling him inside. Suddenly, he wasn't just watching anymore. He was living it. He felt the joy of creating, art, the satisfaction of teaching, the emptiness of greed. Each experience left him with a deeper understanding of himself and the impact his actions had on others. As he explored these alternate realities, Ethan's voice echoed softly in the background. Every choice matters, Jason, even the smallest. Decisions shape the course of your life and the lives of those around you. The Nexus has chosen you because it sees potential in you. Now it's up to you to decide how to use it. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time seemed irrelevant here. By the time Jason emerged from the Nexus, his perspective had changed completely. He no longer saw himself as merely a successful businessman or a son desperate to save his mother. He understood now that true power came not from wealth or influence, but from the ability to uplift others. When he returned to the alley, Ethan was waiting for him, his expression unreadable. "So?" the boy asked simply. "Are you ready?" Jason nodded, a newfound determination in his eyes. "I am. Teach me everything." And with that, Ethan led him back toward the glowing portal, ready to guide him on the next phase of his journey. Little did Jason know the challenges ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive and ready to embrace whatever came next. Jason stepped back into the Nexus, this time feeling more prepared, or at least less overwhelmed than before. The swirling colors and shifting patterns still surrounded him, but now they felt familiar, like returning to a place he had visited, in a dream. Ethan walked beside him, his small frame radiating a quiet confidence that made Jason trust him despite the strangeness of it all. "Welcome to your training," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "The Nexus isn't just about showing you possibilities, it's about teaching you how to shape them." "Shape them?" Jason asked, glancing around at the endless streams of light and energy. "What do you mean?" Ethan stopped walking and turned to face him. "Think of the Nexus as a tool. It gives you access to infinite knowledge and power, but using it requires skill. You'll need to learn how to focus your intentions, control the energy, and make decisions that benefit others, not just yourself." Jason nodded slowly, though his mind was racing. He had always been good at learning new things, whether it was mastering business strategies or picking up hobbies on weekends. But this was different. This wasn't something he could study in books or practice in meetings. It was bigger than anything he'd ever faced. "Let's start with something simple," Ethan said, pointing to a glowing orb hovering nearby. The orb pulsed softly, its golden light casting warm reflections on the shimmering walls. "This represents pure potential. Your task is to guide its energy toward a specific goal." "What kind of goal?" Jason asked, eyeing the orb cautiously. Ethan smiled faintly. "Try thinking of someone who needs help. Picture their face clearly in your mind. Then channel that image into the orb." Jason hesitated, unsure where to begin. Who did he know that needed help? His thoughts drifted briefly to his mother, but she was already healed. Finally, he remembered Claire, a woman he'd met briefly at a cafe earlier that week. She had mentioned struggling to pay her rent after losing her job. Her story had stuck with him, partly because it reminded him of his own struggles growing. Up closing his eyes, Jason pictured Claire's face, her tired smile, the worry lines etched into her forehead, the way she nervously twisted her coffee cup as she spoke. He imagined her relief if her financial burden suddenly disappeared. Slowly, he reached out and touched the orb. At first, nothing happened. The orb remained still, its glow steady and unchanged. Frustration bubbled inside Jason. Was he doing something wrong? Just as he started to pull his hand away, the orb flared brightly, sending a wave of golden energy rippling outward. Images flashed before his eyes. Claire receiving an unexpected check in the mail, paying her rent with tears of gratitude streaming down her face, starting a new job that brought purpose back into her life. When the vision faded, Jason stumbled, backward, breathless. "Did I do that?" he asked, turning to Ethan. "You did," Ethan replied, nodding approvingly. "But remember, the Nexus doesn't create miracles out of thin air. It amplifies what's already within you. You cared about Claire's situation. That's why the energy responded." Jason frowned, processing this information. "So it's not just about thinking of someone who needs help, it's about genuinely caring about them?" "Exactly," Ethan said. "The Nexus feeds off intention. If your motives are selfish or unclear, it won't work. That's why few people can wield its power responsibly." Over the next several hours, or perhaps days, time seemed irrelevant here. Jason practiced again and again. Each session grew more challenging. Sometimes the goals were personal, like helping a neighbor recover from illness or reuniting a lost child with their family. Other times they were broader, like easing the suffering of entire communities affected by natural disasters or poverty. With each success, Jason felt a growing sense of purpose, as if he were finally tapping into a part of himself he hadn't known existed. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when Jason faltered, his doubts and fears clouding his focus. During one particularly difficult exercise, he struggled to direct the energy toward healing a dying forest ravaged by wildfires. No matter how hard he tried, the orb refused to respond. "You're overthinking it," Ethan said gently, placing a hand on Jason's shoulder. "Close your eyes. Breathe. Let go of the fear that you'll fail. Trust yourself." Jason took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. He thought about the trees, the animals, the ecosystems depending on that forest for survival. He imagined green shoots breaking through charred soil, rivers flowing freely once more, birds returning to nest in the branches. Slowly, the orb began to glow brighter, and the vision unfolded. Rain falling gently, flames extinguishing, life returning to the land. When Jason opened his eyes, Ethan was smiling. "See? You're getting better." Despite the progress, Jason couldn't shake the nagging question in the back of his mind. Why him? Out of all the people in the world, why had the Nexus chosen him? One evening, or what passed for evening in this timeless space, he finally worked up the courage to ask. "Why me, Ethan?" Jason asked, sitting cross-legged on the glowing floor. "I'm not special. I've spent most of my life chasing money and success. I'm not exactly the poster child for compassion." Ethan sat down across from him, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. You weren't always compassionate. But that's not what matters. What matters is that you're willing to change. When I gave you the vial, you chose to act out of love instead of fear. That choice showed me, and the Nexus, that you have the capacity to grow. Jason stared at the ground, absorbing Ethan's words. For so long, he had defined himself by his achievements, his wealth, his reputation. Now he realized those things were meaningless compared to the impact he could have on others. I want to keep learning, Jason said firmly. I want to use this power to help people. Not because I feel guilty about my past, but because it feels right. Ethan grinned, a rare flash of excitement crossing his usually calm features. That's the attitude we need. And don't worry. You'll get plenty of chances to practice. Once you leave the Nexus, you'll encounter situations that will test everything you've learned here. Wait, Jason said, his stomach tightening. Leave? You mean I'm going back? Eventually, Ethan replied. The Nexus is a place of preparation, not permanence. The real world is where you'll put your skills to use, but don't worry, I'll be watching. If you ever need guidance, I'll find a way to reach you. Jason nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. He had come so far since that fateful night in the alley, and yet he knew his journey was only beginning. As Ethan stood up and extended a hand to help him rise, Jason felt ready, for the first time in years, to step into the unknown. Together, they approached the edge of the Nexus, where a portal awaited, shimmering with the promise of new adventures. Whatever lay ahead, Jason knew one thing for certain. He would never look at the world or himself the same way again. Jason stepped out of the Nexus and back into the real world, feeling like a completely different person. The air smelled fresher, the sounds of the city seemed sharper, and even the faces of strangers passing by felt more meaningful. He had spent what felt like weeks, or maybe just days, inside the Nexus, learning how to harness its power and understanding the weight of responsibility that came with it. Now standing alone in the alley where everything had begun, he knew his true test was about to start. Ethan had warned him that the real world wouldn't be as forgiving as the Nexus. Here, there were no glowing orbs or holographic screens to guide him. Instead, Jason would have to rely on his instincts, his training, and most importantly, his heart. As he walked out of the alley and onto the busy streets of Chicago, he couldn't help but wonder where to begin. His first challenge came sooner than expected. As Jason crossed the road near Millennium Park, he noticed a young woman sitting on a bench, her head buried in her hands. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped under the weight of whatever burden she carried. Something about her caught Jason's attention, not because she stood out, but because she reminded him of himself. During his darkest days, without thinking, he approached her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, keeping his tone soft so as not to startle her. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red and puffy, evidence of tears shed recently. "I'm fine," she muttered, though her voice betrayed her pain. Jason hesitated, unsure whether to push further. Then he remembered Ethan's words. The Nexus feeds off intention. He didn't need to say much. All he needed to do was care. "I don't know what you're going through," Jason said honestly, "but if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." For a moment, the woman just stared at him as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. "It's my rent. I lost my job last month, and now I'm behind on payments. I don't know what to do." Jason nodded, his mind already working. He didn't have to think too hard. He simply pictured her receiving exactly what she needed. Closing his eyes briefly, he focused on the image of her landlord forgiving her debt and offering her extra time to get back on her feet. When he opened his eyes, he saw a flicker of golden light pass between them, so subtle that only someone looking for it would notice. "Thank you for listening," the woman said quietly, managing a small smile before walking away. Jason watched her go, wondering if his actions had truly made a difference. It wasn't until later that evening, when he saw her talking to her landlord outside her apartment building, that he realized it had worked. The relief on her face was unmistakable. Encouraged by this small victory, Jason began seeking out other opportunities to help. Over the next few days, He wandered the streets of Chicago, paying closer attention to the people around him. At first, it was overwhelming. There were so many stories, so many struggles. A single mother working 2 jobs to feed her kids. An elderly man struggling to afford his medication. A teenager whose dream of attending art school was crushed by mounting student loans. Each situation tugged at Jason's heart, urging him to act. But it wasn't always easy. Sometimes, his intentions weren't enough. During one particularly frustrating attempt, Jason tried to help a homeless veteran find stable housing. No matter how hard he focused, the energy refused to flow. Frustrated, he turned to Ethan, who appeared suddenly beside him as if summoned by thought. "You're forcing it," Ethan said calmly. "Remember, the Nexus responds to genuine compassion. Are you truly connected to this person's story, or are you just trying to fix things?" Jason frowned, considering the question. He realized then that he hadn't taken the time to listen to the veteran's story, to understand the depth of his struggles beyond surface-level observations. Taking a step back, he sat down on the curb and struck up a conversation. The veteran spoke about his experiences in the military, the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life, and the loneliness that often accompanied homelessness. By the time Jason stood up again, he felt a deeper connection to the man, and this time the energy flowed effortlessly. Word of these mysterious acts of kindness began to spread throughout the city. Anonymous donations arrived in mailboxes, medical bills were mysteriously paid off, and struggling families found groceries delivered to their doors overnight. People whispered about a guardian angel watching over them, though no one suspected it was Jason Carter, the millionaire known for being cold and calculating. Despite the gratitude pouring in from those he helped, Jason struggled with the secrecy of his mission. Part of him wanted to tell someone, his mother perhaps, but he knew he couldn't risk exposing the Nexus or Ethan. Still, the isolation weighed heavily on him. For the first time in his life, he understood the loneliness that came with carrying a secret so immense. One night, as he sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the city, Jason allowed himself to reflect on how far he'd come. Before meeting Ethan, he had been consumed by ambition and fear. Fear of failure, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control. Now he found joy in giving without expecting anything in return. Helping others wasn't just fulfilling, it was healing. For the first time, he felt like he was living for something greater than himself. But Jason also knew that his journey was far from over. The Nexus had shown him glimpses of possibilities, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. And even the world. He dreamed of using its power to tackle bigger issues: poverty, climate change, inequality. Yet, he understood that such goals required patience, wisdom, and collaboration. He couldn't do it alone. As dawn broke over the city, Jason made a silent promise to himself. He would continue learning, growing, and helping one person at a time. And whenever doubt crept in, he reminded himself of Ethan's parting words. "If you ever need guidance, I'll find a way to reach you." With renewed determination, Jason stepped out onto the balcony, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The city stretched out before him, alive with potential. Somewhere out there, someone needed help, and Jason was ready to answer the call. Months had passed since Jason first stepped out of the Nexus and into the real world. What began as small acts of kindness, helping individuals pay their rent or recover from illness, had grown into something much larger. Jason had discovered that the Nexus's power wasn't limited to fixing immediate problems. It could also inspire change on a broader scale. He started tackling bigger challenges, funding community centers in underserved neighborhoods, supporting local businesses struggling to survive, and even helping scientists develop sustainable solutions for environmental issues. Each success brought him closer to understanding the full potential of the gift he'd been given. But with every step forward, Jason faced new obstacles. Not everyone welcomed his interventions. Some people grew suspicious of the sudden wave of good fortune sweeping through the city. Rumors spread about a shadowy benefactor pulling strings behind the scenes. Journalists began investigating, determined to uncover the truth. For Jason, staying anonymous became increasingly difficult. He knew that exposing the Nexus, or worse himself, could have devastating consequences. One evening, as Jason sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the glittering lights of Chicago, there was a soft knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat. Few people visited him unannounced, and fewer still knew where he lived. Cautiously, he opened the door and found Ethan standing there, his piercing blue eyes as calm and knowing as ever. "You've done well," Ethan said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "But your work isn't finished." Jason closed the door and turned to face the boy. "What do you mean? Haven't I proven myself already?" Ethan shook his head. "The Nexus chose you not just to help individuals, but to inspire humanity. You've started making changes, but the world needs more than random acts of kindness. It needs leaders who can guide others toward a better future." Jason frowned, unsure what Ethan meant. "Leaders? I'm not a leader. I'm just me." "That's exactly why you're ready," Ethan replied. "You've spent your life building empires and chasing success. Now you can use those skills to build something greater. A legacy that lasts beyond wealth or fame." The words struck a chord deep within Jason. He thought about all the lives he'd touched over the past few months, the families he'd helped, the communities he'd strengthened, the hope he'd restored. Each act had been rewarding but fleeting. What if he could create lasting change? What if he could teach others to care for one another the way he had learned to care? "How do I start?" Jason asked finally, his voice filled with determination. Ethan smiled faintly. "By stepping out of the shadows. People need to see that someone cares enough to fight for them. They need proof that kindness isn't weakness. It's strength." The idea terrified Jason. Revealing himself meant risking everything. His privacy, his reputation, possibly even his freedom. But as he looked into Ethan's unwavering gaze, he realized that fear was no longer an excuse. If he wanted to make a real difference, he had to be willing to sacrifice. Over the next few weeks, Jason began laying the groundwork for his public debut. He used his resources to organize events aimed at raising awareness about social issues, from homelessness to climate change. At first, he stayed in the background, letting others take the spotlight. But gradually, he stepped forward, sharing his own story. Not the part about the Nexus, but the journey that had led him to this point. He spoke openly about his struggles, his mistakes, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. To his surprise, people listened. His message resonated deeply. Strangers reached out to thank him, inspired by his honesty and vulnerability. Others began following his lead, organizing their own initiatives to help those in need. Slowly but surely a movement took shape, one rooted in compassion and action rather than greed or self-interest. Still, Jason knew that true leadership required more than speeches and rallies. It demanded accountability, transparency, and collaboration. He reached out to experts in various fields, inviting them to join his cause. Together, they worked on projects designed to address systemic problems, from improving access to healthcare to creating job opportunities for marginalized communities. Jason poured his heart and soul into these efforts, driven by the belief that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. Through it all, Ethan remained a constant presence, appearing whenever Jason needed guidance or encouragement. Though the boy rarely offered direct advice, his quiet confidence reminded Jason of the path he'd chosen and the responsibility that came with it. One day, as Jason stood on the rooftop of a newly renovated community center, watching children play and families gather below, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time he felt truly alive. He had found purpose, not in wealth or power, but in service to others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm, golden glow, Ethan appeared beside him. "You've come a long way," the boy said softly. "But remember, this is only the beginning." Jason nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I'm ready," he said. "Whatever comes next, I'll face it." Ethan returned the smile, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. Jason watched him go, knowing that while their paths might diverge, the lessons Ethan had taught him would stay with him forever. With renewed resolve, Jason turned back to the city, ready to continue the work he had started. Somewhere out there, someone needed help, and he would be there to answer the call. The Nexus had given him a gift, but it was up to him to decide how to use it. And for Jason Carter, the choice was clear: a life dedicated to healing, hope, and humanity.